We're here today to talk with Terry Stewart. And we're here with Terry and with Kevin here. Thought this would be a great opportunity to talk to Terry. I've known Terry since I've known you since youth work, starting at senior camp.
Yes. Yeah.
And I remember you brought your equipment in the truck and you slept in the truck.
Yeah, those were some unusual circumstances in those days.
Those were the early days. It was at a campground, so they didn't have dorms. They had no housing unless you were going to stay off site.
The dedication of the sound man sleeping in the back of his truck.
That's right. And those were the days where you couldn't just go get a hotel.
No. The budgets weren't.
The budget was tight.
Yeah. Yeah, it was just enough money to get the gear there.
Right.
And maybe a couple of hands to help set up.
Yeah. And then from senior camp, then a couple years later, you ended up doing youth convention.
Yeah.
And then that kind of created a relationship. We did a Way Choir tour.
Yeah.
The first one.
That was fun.
So that was the beginning of our relationship.
Yeah.
And then here locally at GBFBC, you've done pretty much after the initial install, all of the work and rework on our facility. So, but I think, people see the sound guy come in to do work, but they don't know maybe the background or the testimony of who you are and where you came from. So this gives us an opportunity to kind of talk about that. So tell us, you were raised in church.
Yeah. My grandfather on my father's side, he was the first one that was introduced to Pentecost. I guess Pentecost, they were originally from the Mississippi area around the Delta. And, Pentecost, was kind of in their bloodstream. Mm-hmm. And when they migrated north for work, my granddad carried that belief system with him. And he found a church northwest Indiana, just outside of Chicago. And my parents started to attend that church. I was just a little kid. I'll never forget the day my parents first got the Holy Ghost and I was introduced to Pentecost. I thought they were hurting my mom and dad. I didn't understand this. We have ushers rushing back. Somebody grab that kid. He's,
He's having a meltdown.
Yeah. But that was the start and the introduction of, a life-changing experience in my life. My brother and I, we served God really hard through high school, the beginning of our youth, all the way through, high school graduation. My parents had a rough patch. They had stopped going to church, but they never really held us up. They supported us going to church.
Right.
Basically what happened is I grew up playing drums in a small home missions church.
So that's where you started your drum experience.
I that's where I cut my teeth on, figuring out how to play well with others. And it was always preached to us that when we were on the platform and, we were giving back a gift, it was a sacrifice and, it should be respected as that. So as I got older, I'm getting ready to graduate high school. I've stayed in church as a young man my whole high school career. I really excelled on the drums in the school music program, and so I basically got some offers, scholarship offers to go to school and study music.
Okay, I didn't know that. That's
cool. So I think I held out one year before I moved into Chicago, and I went over to Chicago to study music. Mm-hmm. And just by happenstance, a day job that I was doing, a guy walked in and I was practicing on a practice pad, and he goes, "Oh, you're a drummer." And I go, "Well, I'm an aspiring drummer. I'm studying." And so I went down
This is like 20, you're 20, 19, 20?
Yeah, 19, 20 years old.
Okay.
So I went down the list of the guys that I was studying with at the conservatory, and this guy was somehow connected in the business and knew all the guys. And so he goes, "Hey, we do side jingle work, and if you want to do some extra work, they're commercials." He said,
Okay.
they're beer commercials. And he goes, "But we're always looking for young musicians from the conservatory."
Yeah.
So he set up an interview, and I went in, and I played. And the particular day I played, he was there, and he was in the control room. And I finished what I was doing. And I was a pretty good sight reader in those days.
Mm-hmm.
And I came out and he said, "Hey, kid, I got to tell you." He goes, "I don't know what that feel is you got." He goes, "But you're the real deal."
Yeah.
He goes, "I could keep you working so you could give up that deli job."
Yeah.
So one thing led to another, and I was doing session work there. And as soon as I figured out that I could get monetary gain for this,
Right.
I started auditioning everywhere.
Okay. That was kind of like your door that opened in your
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm literally playing with 3 or 4 different bands, doing session work in the day, renting a rehearsal studio for every waking moment that, I wasn't working, I was practicing, and I was probably living on about 2.5, 3 hours sleep. And I remember a statement I made one time. I said, "God, if you just open the musical doors and allow me to do this, I will be a witness unto the end of the earth for you." And I think when I first got into it, the intentions were good.
Right.
But as you get into that business, and the more success you get, the further the shoreline gets.
Yeah.
You become so busy that, pretty soon when you're waking up in the morning and starting the day with prayer, well, I'll get to that tomorrow. Yeah. And pretty soon the communication with God breaks down, and it begins to open the door for a whole litany of other problems. Right. So long story short, I think that God allowed me to be successful because I'm the perfect prodigal son story. I reached a point to where success was literally close enough to me that I could embrace it and hug it. But it was still far enough away that I wasn't going to change the world with what I was doing. So in the whole makeup of things, I remember one night sitting really late, and I was not in a good condition mentally, probably had way too many chemicals and alcohol. And I remember the statement that I made, and even in that condition, the conviction that filled me. And it was I think at that point it was a life-changing moment. I basically packed everything up from Illinois, moved back to Indiana, and I started getting phone calls from Los Angeles for some auditions.
Okay, let me interrupt you right there. So you're doing all the studio work you're doing. This guy's got you introduced to a lot of different areas, and you're connecting with a lot of different people, which kind of opens the door. You're not getting enough sleep, right? You're running on fumes, so then you're distracted, so you're not going to church as much,
right? Because
your whole focus is this. So where did you just mentioned alcohol and drugs. Where did that kind of enter into the picture?
I had become so numb to the person that I used to be and the person that I allowed God to work through that communication had completely broken down. Mm-hmm. And at some point mentally, you start to feel like that you're you're on an island all by yourself. So the pressures of, we got to get this record out, this jingle has to be released, these songs have to be recorded. And everybody knew that I was just working hard. And I'll never forget one of the engineers who was a huge influence in my life. This guy was, I'm telling you, if you guys could ever, as audio engineers out there, if anybody could ever have tutelage under this guy, that, it would be like studying with a doctor. Right. This guy was pretty incredible. And one night he saw me on the sofa and I wasn't my jovial self. I was always the life of the party. And he goes, "Hey kid, what's wrong with you?" He goes, "You look down." I said, "Man, I'm exhausted, Don." He said, "Hey, I got something. I got the ticket that will help you and it'll get you through tonight and probably half the day tomorrow." Mm-hmm. So we went back to the tape machine and they had a marble slab back there. And keep in mind, I'm green.
Right.
I know nothing about this stuff. Yeah. So I see these mounds of white powder and these stretched out lines, and he hands me a rolled up $100 bill and he goes, "This is on me." I was taken back. I really didn't know what to do. I'm holding this $100 bill and I'm staring him in the eye, and he's kind of got this half smirk on his face. And I'm like, I can't let these guys down.
Right.
That's just powder. I'm going to do this. And did a whole line. Well, the first time that I did it, I didn't actually realize what it did for me. I didn't understand the being high portion.
Right.
So I knew that I was wide awake. I knew that I could work. I don't think I slept for 3 days after doing that first line, but I didn't realize what it was.
Right.
So the ice was broken right there. Mm-hmm. So a few days later, we're at a record releasing party, and one of the guitarists that I had been working with calls me to a little side room at this millionaire guy's house. He says, "Hey, I got us taken care of for the night." He lays out a line, and I'm like, man, that stuff was harmless. It didn't do anything for me. Mm-hmm. Did that line. And it wasn't even 20 minutes later, I had the first realization of what cocaine was. Mm-hmm. And from that moment, it was literally a satanic lightning bolt, and I was addicted. For the rest of my career in the music business, every dime I made went towards making sure I had a pile of coke somewhere. Mm-hmm. And then the coke embellished my taste and desire for alcohol. And the next thing I know, I'm totally strung out, full-blown alcoholic, and I'm not this young, innocent Pentecostal kid from Indiana anymore.
Right. So that's kind of heavy.
Yeah. I break up when I even think about it, where God's brought me from, and his hand of grace and mercy in my life is, it's overwhelming at times.
So, it can start and happen that fast.
That fast.
Yeah. So you're a mess. You haven't even gone to LA.
No.
So, and you go back home to Indiana, but now you got all these connections. People know your skill set. So you start getting leads.
Yeah.
And this is what brings you to California?
Yeah, I had come out to California. A friend of mine was working for ABC Radio, and he kept saying, "You need to move out to California." He goes, "This is where everything's happening." So I had initially come out here and stayed probably 6 weeks with him, and went back home. So I had already built a very small network of people from that 6 weeks that I was out there. And there was a lead singer in a band from my hometown. And, everybody knew that Bobby was going to be a superstar. And his band was, they were just tearing up the strip. And they lost their drummer due to drugs and alcohol. Mm-hmm. And I get a phone call, "Hey, when you were out here 6 weeks ago, when you were setting in, We really liked what you were doing. Would you consider coming out and doing a full audition and, becoming a full bandmate? So I said, give me 3 or 4 days to think this over, because I had some other things on the table too. I called him back and I said, I'm flying out. And this was at Christmas time. I think it was like December 28th or something. It was right after Christmas. Now, keep in mind, I'm now going to Los Angeles, and I like to refer to this. I'm getting ready to enter the devil's lair, and I'm entering this place with an entire litany of addictions and problems.
Right.
So in the back of my mind, there's still that little Pentecostal kid jumping up and down, reminding me this is not going to be good.
Right. It's not going to end well.
This is not going to be good. You need to,
And for those that need a point of reference, this was is this the 80s?
This was the 80s. This was a high point.
So 80s, we're talking, we're talking Sunset Boulevard.
Sunset, hair metal. Yeah.
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 So point of reference, who's the big bands during this era that's
So Haphazard was working on a record deal, and some of the assignment shows that we got, we opened for Guns N' Roses. There was a big show at the Troubadour that was basically Scott Travis was leaving the band Judas Priest. So they brought in Racer X, Judas Priest, Guns N' Roses, Mr. Big, and Haphazard was on the bill. So we're playing with the big guns.
Yeah, this would be all the 80s.
Yeah.
Motley Crue,
yes.
All the whole thing. So you're coming in, and you've already got, you're not coming in the best position.
No.
And you're coming into LA. So then you start drumming with this band from your hometown.
Yeah.
And then what happened there?
So, as I said, I had that little Pentecostal kid in the back of my head, a constant reminder.
Right.
Never left you.
Never left me. Never. Train up a child in the way that they will go. That is the truth.
Yeah.
I also had another voice. My father in the Lord, Lyle Wayne Worthen, his son lived out here, and he had settled into San Fernando at Mike Flowers' church. Mm-hmm. And I would literally twice a day, I'd get a phone call. Bro, I need you to come out here. I need you to meet Pastor Flowers. You're going to love this guy. Mm-hmm. You don't have to go to church. I just want you to come meet him.
Yeah.
Well, he was planting the seed.
Right.
He knew I was under conviction.
Yeah.
And he was relentless. This guy would not let it go. Mm-hmm. So I'm out here trying to achieve success. I've got my internal voices keep, just constantly haunting me. This guy's ringing my phone off the hook. And things aren't going good, because when I left the Chicagoland area, I left a pretty serious relationship, and it went south. So I've got all this heaviness on me, and I really have nothing to turn to but a bunch of wild friends who were, addicted to everything under the sun.
Right.
So my addictions got greater. I mean, I literally could not start the day without a fifth of vodka and at least, a quarter ounce of blow. I was probably consuming 2/5 of hard liquor, a case of beer a day. I was going through an 8-ball of Coke a week. It just was not a good situation. So Steve, at my lowest moment one morning, I have nothing to do. And sometimes idle time is the devil's playground. Mm-hmm. And he caught me, just before I made decisions to do other things. And he said, "Hey, I really want to come pick you up and take you over to meet Brother Flowers." Mm-hmm. So now I'm irritated. So to shut him up, I said, "Listen,
get this over with.
I cannot come today, but if you be here tomorrow morning, I'll go to church with you tomorrow morning." Yeah. So he shows up. Now keep in mind, this is the 80s. This is hair metal day. I mean, I have
You look
extremely long hair, bleach blonde, pierced ears.
Yeah.
You know.
And you probably look like
leather,
tore up from the floor up.
Yeah, I was just, I was the living incarnate of, the 80s rock star.
Yeah.
So he comes and picks me up. And the first thing, walking in the door's open, and I hear them singing. They're singing from hymnals. They had a praise band up there and everything, but they're still singing from hymnals. Mm-hmm. And the song that they were singing hit me so hard that I literally stopped and grabbed the handrail because I knew something was about to happen.
Yeah. Wow.
And when the door opened, the first guy I saw was Tim Flowers up there leading worship and exhorting. And when I say exhorting, I'm talking borderline preaching.
Right.
Tim Flowers is about my age. Yeah. I had a flashback that was, that's what you could have been. Mm-hmm. What happened to you? Yeah. Everything is gone. Mm-hmm. And sometimes, I think back and I thank God for, God has a plan A for us, right, but he has a plan B. Mm-hmm. So I went into the church under a lot of conviction. And I don't even think I lasted 20 minutes. Mm-hmm. And I got tears streaming down my face, and they're just worshiping. And Steve saw it, and he grabbed my arm, and we headed to the altar. Mm-hmm. And I hit the altar, and I prayed back through, speaking in tongues in about 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. Brother Flowers, after the service, called me in his office, and he said, welcome back. He says, God's given you a second chance here. But I want to give you a warning. He said, you cannot get in the car today and go back to Hollywood and pick up where you left off. If you do, you're going to ruin everything that God did this morning.
Right.
And I knew he was right. So I made the decision in his office. He told me, he goes, we have an apartment in the basement. He said, if you'll go gather all of your stuff, he said, here's the keys. You can stay here until you figure out what you need to do. But he says, you cannot be in Hollywood.
Right. Wow.
So Tim Flowers said, I'll take you.
Wow, that's cool.
So we start to drive over the hill, and I told him, I said, you got to stop. He goes, why? He goes, Terry, you have to do this. I said, no, that's not what I mean. I said, you got to find a barbershop right now. Because if I do not get rid of this persona.
Yeah, you got to get rid of
this persona is what speaks for me when I walk into a room. Yeah. Do you know how much power there is in hair and a look and what you represent? I said, if I don't change this right now, it will continue to change me.
Right.
So we went into a barbershop, and I sat in a chair, and the guy's looking at my hair. He's like, you want to donate this? I said, no, I don't care what you do with it, but give me a flat top. Okay. So he gives me a flat top.
Yeah.
And Tim Flowers is literally sitting in the chair, and he's got tears in his eyes.
Yeah.
And when all the hair hit the floor, I knew that what God had done for me that morning, I had taken the robe that Satan had wrapped me up in and left it in the floor of that barbershop and got out. As soon as I got out of there, God could begin to do a work in my life. Now, I will tell you guys this, and you can ask Brother Flowers, but every gray and white hair he has on his head, that's Terry Stewart.
Yeah.
I did all of that.
Yeah.
I wasn't, you got to remember, I hadn't been in church for a long time, right, and I came with a lot of baggage.
Yeah.
I had a lot of baggage, and I didn't know quite how to fit into church anymore. Yeah. And I was constantly making the wrong decisions. And Brother Flowers would smack me back into my lane, and so it was a rough and tumble comeback, but it was the grace of God that did bring me back, and that was in 1989, and I haven't looked back.
Yeah. So so now you got it. So at what point you're in LA, you're playing with the band. How at what level were you? Because there was some record label signing contracts and some things that, I mean, it looked like things were really going to open up for you, and you had to go back and tell those guys, nah, I'm done. Well, so
let me give you some context. At that time in Los Angeles, we were working on a record deal. We were constantly meeting with people, and things were looking really promising. We did a style of music, or I should say the group did. Even though I was brought in to be a 1/5 split and a true band member, they had already shaped the direction, the band, the sound. Yeah. I was just the guy that could come in and easily, take the helm of the rhythm section. So they were creating kind of this new sound that was precursor to the grunge sound, and it was called atomic metal. And Guns N' Roses, they'd pretty much put their stamp on the direction that music was going to go from there. And it had become more vulgar. It had become more dark. It was just a really dark place. So at that time, you have to keep in mind, if you even had anybody looking at you, you felt like you were on the verge of hitting the lottery.
Right.
Because there were 17,000 unsigned bands just in Los Angeles County that every one of them felt like they were getting a deal tomorrow. And only about 2% of those got signed.
Right.
So the chances of you succeeding at this was very, very rough. And, we're talking a group of guys that would come from Iowa, Nebraska, drive across country, live in their cars. I mean, they would do whatever it took to achieve. There's a lot of desire to make sacrifices, to get the end goal. Yeah. So after I got the haircut, I told Tim, I said, I'm not for sure who's going to be at the apartment, but I'll go in and I'll start packing stuff up and I'll come down and get you. I, had this big, beautiful drum kit. I go upstairs and we had a guy that worked. He was kind of like our tour manager. His name was Strohs, and he kind of, wherever we played, he was our representation. And he's an ex-military guy, and I go in and I start packing my bag, and Strohs is looking at me. He's not saying a word and throwing more stuff in the bag. I start rolling up my bedding. I grab another bag, start packing it. And finally, he's got the dumb Labrador look on his face, and he's like, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Strohs, right now, I'm not in a position to tell you, help you, or even enlighten you on what's happened to me. But I promise you, I'm going to come back here and I'm going to explain everything to you, but I can't be here anymore." He said, "Yeah, right." He goes, "You guys are on the verge of signing." He goes, "You walk away now, you can't get back in." I said, I've already made that decision. Yeah. So he's literally following me to the car thinking this is an April Fool's joke. He's just not buying it. And as I'm putting stuff in the car, he's pulling it out of the car. And finally, Tim gets out of the car. And, Tim, he's a big, tall guy, and Strohs kind of sees him. And
This is Brother Flowers.
Yeah, Tim Flowers. And so anyhow, we get all my stuff in the car. We load my drum set. And when I left Hollywood, I never went back for another 5 years. I just walked away. I didn't contact anyone. I didn't want any pulls.
Right.
Now, I was worried because we were under some contractual obligations. And I gave it to God, and I said, let the chips fall where they may. This is in your hands. I can't, and I could have been sued for a very large sum of money. Mm-hmm. And I basically walked away and let it lay, and not one person ever contacted me.
Wow. So now you're going to church in San Fernando. This is late 80s, 90s.
Yeah.
So how did you end up meeting how long did you go to church in San Fernando? And then how did you meet your wife?
I went to church in San Fernando from about 89, I think, until 91.
Yeah.
I had left out of there. My wife's sister went to a Trinitarian Pentecostal Espanol movement. I don't think there was any sort of organization tied to it, but like a small independent Spanish church. Mm-hmm. She was looking for another church, and she stumbled into Brother Flower's church one day. And I think she came maybe 3 times, and the 4th time she came, she brought her sister.
Okay. So I didn't realize you met her there in San Fernando.
Yeah. That's yeah. Cool. But, that was one of those situations that, Brother Flowers lost a lot of sleep at night over.
Yeah.
But long story short, I had told Steve Worthen, the guy who was responsible for me getting back in church, when she walked in, I said, God's going to save her and I'm going to marry her. Mm-hmm. And to this day, they kid about that statement I made.
Yeah.
So I met my wife there. We got married in 92, but I had left California. When my wife and I got married, we decided we wanted to live, back in my hometown in Indiana. Mm-hmm. We moved back to Indiana. One of the things that I wanted to do was get as far away from the industry that I worked in.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So I went totally polar opposite. I went and got my Series 7, became a regional sales manager for the Prudential, and just, started to excel at that.
Right.
But there was always this, when God gives you a talent and, you don't do anything with it, there's always this, it's a haunting desire. I should be doing something with this.
Yeah.
So there was, we were paying bills, but I was very, very unmotivated and very bored with what I was doing.
So now take us to, the next phase in your life is you're back in California, mm-hmm. and now you're not a drummer in a band. That's not what you're doing, but now you're doing sound. Where did that start? How did you get in it? How successful were you able to make it in California? And then kind of what was the closing of the door in California?
So when my wife and I decided to leave Indiana, our pastor at the time in Indiana called ahead and personally talked to a handful of pastors out here and said that, we were moving out and that we would be coming by to see their church. Mm. And we had about 5 churches to go to because I wasn't for sure where I would end up. Right. I was getting a company transfer. Mm-hmm. So we wanted to make sure that we visited all the churches in case I ended up, one of the options was actually Bakersfield. Mm-hmm. But as it turned out, we ended up, in the heart of Los Angeles County in the San Fernando Valley. Mm-hmm. And I'll never forget, we visited Pastor Don Connor, and my pastor from Indiana, and I say this with all due respect, mm-hmm. The pastor from Indiana had talked to these pastors, and he had, he let them know that, Terry Stewart's a hard worker. He's very loyal to his, to mm-hmm. ministry. But you have no idea what you're getting here.
But
He's he's a drummer. He's talented on the drums.
Yeah.
And he is very knowledgeable about sound and production.
Yeah.
And his one fault is he does not know the word no. Mm-hmm. So, he basically filled in all the gaps for these guys.
Yeah.
So every place we went, it wasn't us visiting. It was, so you do sound.
Yeah.
And you're a drummer too. Uh-huh. And I was kind of uncomfortable with that because
that was the lead in.
I really didn't want to do that stuff. Right. I didn't know it at the time. I just, I'm not coming here to be a sound guy.
Right.
So we go to Pastor Don Connor's church. Something had been going on. I go to the front door and I said, "We're here to see Pastor Don Connor." He goes, "Wait 1 minute." And my wife and I are standing in the foyer. He comes back out and he goes, "Pastor Connor, we'll see you now." Takes us into the office. We're both standing there in front of his desk and he goes, "Sit down and shut the door." Okay. Shut the door. My wife and I sit down. He goes, "There's a pharisaical spirit going through the land right now. We're in the middle of a spiritual battle. You either get in or get out." I looked at my wife and I said, "We're home.
I think we found the church.
We're home." He didn't care who I was, what I had to offer.
He didn't care about sound. He had bigger troubles.
We're home. Wow. Pastor Connor was a very entrepreneurial guy. He eventually found out that I was an audio engineer, mm-hmm. and he is very musically talented,
right.
Phenomenal guitarist, good piano player. He and his wife sings. His son's very talented. And he was kind of the inspiration for me he's like, very stern Irish guy. "You can't abandon that talent. God gave that to you. You need to get back out there and put it to use."
Right.
He goes, "There's churches that need you."
Right.
So one thing led to another, and I just remember I was getting phone calls from churches to go help fix
whatever
Radio Shack sound system they had installed. Because at the time, they didn't have the technology we have today,
right?
And
piecemeal,
a lot of home missions churches were built off of Radio Shack. So I'm going in making little changes and they're just, their jaws on the ground. They're like, "We had no idea our system could sound like that. What did you do?" And so one thing led to another, and now my phone's blowing up. And I just went in one night and I said, "Hey, babe, what do you think? What do you think about me doing this full time? There's a need in the church."
Right.
And she's like, "I don't know. The company moved you out here.
This is a risk.
This is big. We don't have the investment money you need."
Right.
So I kind of put it on the back burner. I never thought anything of it. And there was a man that went to the church, and he is literally the honorary CEO of Simon Productions. Mm-hmm. And he came to me, and he liked what I did at our local church.
Right.
He was just like, "You have an unusual skill set." Now, keep in mind, he was an engineer, so he understood a lot of what I was doing. Mm-hmm. He says, "You have an unusual skill set I've never seen in the church." He said, "I want to invest in you." Mm-hmm. He goes, "I understand that, through some rumblings, you could make a business of this." Mm-hmm. And he hands me an envelope and walked away.
Yeah.
So I go home and I tell my wife, I said, "Hey, Brother Regal came up and encouraged me. Right. He gave me an envelope. Now I'm going to open it thinking there's $50 in there."
Yeah. Some token gesture to help you get going.
There's a check for almost $100,000.
Wow.
I'm serious.
Wow.
Now this guy was a millionaire.
Okay.
He was.
When he went to the church there? Okay.
He was a real estate guy, ex-military engineer. Yeah. He had a small...
Yeah, but still, to just like drop that kind of dime.
Yeah. It was incredible.
That's a big one.
It was incredible. So it scared my wife and I. My wife says, "There is absolutely no way we can take this. We cannot pay this back. You take that check back to him now." Forget this idea.
Right.
So I went back to him and I said, Brother Regal, I can't pay this back. And he goes, I'm not asking you to. He goes, get on your feet. And he goes, when you start making profit, pay it down a little at a time.
Wow.
So I went back to my wife and I said, babe, this could be a really good opportunity.
Yeah.
And I said, I won't quit my job right away. But I said, we could start to purchase the things that we need that could open some doors.
Yeah.
And so we prayed about it. We were serious. We weren't just going to, jump down the hole right away. When I would say when my wife, because I'm a little more adventurous than she is when it comes to doing new things and, new adventures. When she had peace with it, I knew that it was time.
Yeah.
So she had peace with it. We took it, and I officially launched. Now my buddy, Steve Worthen, he was doing some marketing stuff. The original name of my company, and don't laugh, was Hot Air Productions.
Hot Air.
Now, Hot Air Productions in the church could be offensive. But I was so excited about the fact that I had a business card that had my name on it with a logo. Yeah. I went with it. It was sometime later a buddy of mine brought it to my attention that you do know you're calling all the preachers a bunch of hot air blowhards. I go, what do you mean? He goes, think about your company title.
Right.
And then it dawned on me. Yeah. I'm like, yeah, this is not a good name.
That might not be good.
So, Eric Williams.
Uh-huh.
Eric has come into my life at this time, and he knows a marketing guy from New York. And he goes, Eric, this is Eric, give me a paragraph of what your goals, ambitions, and what do you want to do with this company?
Yeah.
And he goes, get it to me. Make sure the punctuation is right.
Yeah.
So I get it to him.
British.
He hands it off to this guy, and this guy sends this packet, and there's like 15 company names, 15 logos. Choose one. They're free. It's my gift.
Oh, wow.
The Simon Pro logo with the speaker woofer and the 2-color thing stuck out.
Yeah.
Like I said, that's it. I mean, that is recognizable anywhere.
Yeah.
And we changed the name because I was actually playing with Pastor Connor's son. He had started a Christian group, and the name of the band was Simon Called Peter. Mm-hmm. We were trying to work with David Huff from David and the Giants. Mm-hmm. And I remember hearing a story that, about their whole band name, David and the Giants, Giant Records, Giant Productions. Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking I'm going to be clever. Simon Productions, Simon Records. There it is.
Thinking real
Simon
big.
Called Peter.
Yeah.
So I named it. 3 months later, the band broke up. There is no Simon Called Peter, but I got thousands of letterheads, and so I left it.
And you have Simon Productions.
And it was a great in for all of the Jewish clients.
Yeah.
Because it's Simon. And a lot of those clients only hire within.
Okay.
I'll tell you a funny story. I had a cantor one time come to me, and he said, I just heard somebody call you Stewart. He goes, who's Stewart? I said, me. He goes, well, who's Simon? I said, my company. He goes, that does not leave this room. You're too valuable.
Your cover's been blown. So with that initial seed money, you started a production company.
Mm-hmm. 26 years in L.A.
26 years. What and you became very successful with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But you're still doing I think what's cool about you, Terry, is the success of that. You were like doing some big productions.
Mm-hmm.
So there's two sides to this. There's the production side of it that you were doing on a professional level, but then there was also a church side of it.
Yeah.
So on the production side of it, how just for context, what institutions were you working with? Were you doing concerts? Were you doing live events? How successful there? And then what were some of the drawbacks to that?
So the business ended up being broken up. It was kind of a threefold business. There was we did tour support, We did festival, concert, and corporate reinforcement, and then we did fixed installs. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't mean this in a demeaning way. It's just the scenario that we have to deal with in church culture. So, when I decided that I was going to do this again and I was going to do it on the church level, my initial thought is I'm going to take the world by storm, and, every church organization is going to hire me,
right,
without knowing or understanding sort of the corporate structure of a church. Mm-hmm. So it took me maturing a little bit to understand that, look, a church organization can't necessarily just give you all their business when they've been working with established people already, because there's feelings involved. Yeah. What are they going to do? Just because you can do a better job, just fire them?
Right.
It can't happen, because now you're dealing with somebody else's livelihood, investments they've made, feelings could be hurt. Mm-hmm. So it was a lot of wisdom on leadership to say, hey, pump the brakes. Mm-hmm. We know you're back here, when the time is available. And that's basically how I broke into the church market. But in the meantime, I needed to make this thing work. And so on a very small scale, I started working on the collegiate level. I was doing, we were taking in full PA systems and recording gear to UCLA, Loyola Marymount University, the Cal State system. We were doing all their presidential level events, big stuff. This is arena-size events. Mm-hmm. And it was good, really good paying stuff.
Right.
So that's how we were able to keep, the so-called wheels greased, keep money into the system while I'm waiting patiently for opportunities to open in the church. Yeah. Because my goal was I really wanted to only do church work. Mm-hmm. But the flip side to that is because other men had been doing this in the church for so long, they had an established name. Nobody knew who Terry Stewart or Simon Pro was. I didn't even exist to them. I wasn't on the radar. As hard as it was for me to understand, how could I be doing this on the pro level, and I go to church events and they have nothing but problems? It was hard for me to understand. But God got me through that period, and doors began to open. and there's a story in that too. When I matured and realized what I needed to do, that's when God opened the doors. Mm-hmm. But when I was trying to kick them down, they stayed locked.
Yeah.
And that's how it works in the kingdom of God. You can't, I'm not. Stuff. Yeah, I can't force it. I can't run in and think that I'm just going to hand out resumes and by this great resume, people are going to hire me. It doesn't work that way.
We've had some fun conversations about being in church, and yet you're doing sound stuff. Corporate's not probably a big deal, but you were also doing live events, and then how that affected you. And at some point, you had to make a decision. So, like, what live event, what concerts were you doing? What name recognition people did you have a chance to do?
So I've worked with a lot of different people. We were doing tour level support for a lot of groups, and we've worked with Brad Paisley, Joe Satriani, John Legend, Stevie Wonder, B.B. King. We did B.B. King's last second to the last tour before he passed away. I've worked for some of the greats in the music business, and for me, because I'd already been inside the business, it wasn't, I wasn't.
You weren't starstruck. I wasn't. Because now you were looking at it. I know what
it was a job. Yeah. It was a job. They were trusting me and paying me good money to accomplish
your skill set.
Yeah.
But at the same, and you had to do that to get the business going because you're trying to get somewhere.
Right.
But at the same time, it probably starts to wear on you a little bit, because even though you're not the drummer in the band, you're the sound guy, there's still a whole culture that's even connected and attached to that.
Yeah, it's as hard as you may try, and I did. I really did. I tried to be a Christian everywhere I went. In fact, a lot of the tour crews, knew me as the preacher, they called me. And a lot of them actually told me they liked when I was on an event and a show because for whatever reason, they said there was something about my spirit that made them feel safe. So,
well, that, and they probably appreciated that this guy has chops, and he's not out of his head, and he's not high,
yes,
and he's not drunk.
Yes, yes. They, whenever I would tune a PA for the first time for a client, you could definitely see that they were like, wow, where have you been? This is incredible. But keep in mind, I had been trained by serious engineers. When I first got in this business, I didn't go near a mixing console for 3.5 years. You weren't allowed to even look at one. You were a glorified cable puller. You got to learn the trade secrets. You got to learn how to patch and build racks, and learning how to solder and do rigging and just a myriad of different functions just to pull off an event like that. So
that's part of the problem in some of our apostolic circles, because if you've done a couple sound systems, all of a sudden you're an expert, but you're really not an engineer.
Yeah.
And there's a big difference.
There's a huge difference.
When you start talking about programming and setting up software, and then you start getting into the actual engineering part of a sound system, that's what has impressed me in working with you, because at some point you start talking about stuff. I have no clue what in the world you're even talking about, but I know it connects, obviously.
Right. It translates, and it's this is something I've seen in the church world. And God bless home mission churches. They're doing the best they can. But one of the mistakes they make is just because Timmy, David, Johnny, whoever it might be, is really good on a computer, that's our sound guy. Not necessarily. Right. You can be great. You can have a great skill set with technology, but you can be a terrible sound guy. I would rather find the guy that has an enormous music collection on his phone that's listening to music all day long and doesn't know anything about tech, mix my event, because he understands the relationship,
instrumentation,
voicings, placement. That's what matters when you're mixing. I don't care how technically skilled you are in building computer networks and all of that. That is important when you're doing an install. But when you're mixing a service, you got to have somebody who can think logically with and translate in the time domain what they're hearing.
Yeah. So you've done a little bit of it all, trying to get into the ultimate goal, which was to get involved in helping churches and work with churches. So just, if you don't mind saying, when you're in LA, at the peak of your business, what were you doing?
So at the very peak of my business, we were, like I alluded to earlier, we were doing tour support. We were doing a lot of collegiate accounts. We had some of the most prestigious collegiate accounts in LA. And we shared them with other companies, because it's such a large, broad market. And there were some great, listen, I built some really good relationships with other companies. They, there's kind of this ongoing theme that because you build a production company next to another production company that you're supposed to be enemies. And that is the furthest from the truth. That is your partner.
Yeah.
Things that you can't do, they can. Things that they can't acquire, you can. Yeah. So building that relationship and working with your neighbor, and that's one of the things that I did is I built a solid relationship and a network with some of the largest companies out there, which led to me getting some of the prestigious work that I got.
Right.
So it's, I would say it was basically tour support, the corporate stuff we were doing, collegiate stuff. But then the church market started to open up, and our integration really exploded. Yeah. I was literally traveling all over the country, designing and installing systems. Yeah. And one of the things that I learned out there is, and listen, I've gone into a lot of bad scenarios and had to fix things that weren't, necessarily correct. But you can't go into every situation and just blame the last guy that was there, because A, you don't know what the budgetary constraints were. You don't know the problems or obstacles they were given. And maybe at the time with the scenario they were given, this is what it called for.
Right.
I've gone on several installs and basically gone in and said, well, this isn't working because you don't have this, this, and this. We install it. All of a sudden they have a different PA. It's working good. And somebody will come up and say, oh, yeah, on the original design, we took out all that because we couldn't afford it. Well, it wasn't the integrator's fault. It was because the church couldn't afford it.
Yeah.
So understanding that, and, you just don't want to run around giving people a black eye.
Yeah. So at some point, there was a downturn in the market.
Yeah.
And you ended up having to sell, and you moved from the LA area to Tennessee.
Well, I don't know if it was, 2008 was a bad year, but we really survived. We really did. A lot of those relationships I told you about, when things were slow, I was getting phone calls. I have a good friend of mine who's really connected with NAM, and he was getting overloaded, and there were about four or five large stages at NAM that he couldn't handle, and he handed them to us. And so, we got to work with a lot of those organizations, and we maintained through 2008. But I think the nail in the coffin was the realization that I wanted my life to be a lot simpler than what it needed to be, living in Los Angeles and the hustle, the bustle,
and the traffic.
And taxes and fees and I mean, literally the amount of money that I had to pay and the insurances that were required. I wanted to simplify things, but I also wanted to get to a point to where I don't want to travel anymore. I'm 57 years old. I'm tired. I've been doing this a long time. Yeah. I want to stay at home. I want to spend time with my family. I want to stay at my local church. Right. My local church has, great needs. We've been able to do some huge monumental improvements there. And because we have, we've integrated some really sophisticated system, which requires ongoing maintenance. And when I'm on the road all the time, I spin my wheels because, by the time I get back into town, it's, fix this, we get this fixed, but then there's no room to grow because I got to go back out on the road again. So my move to Tennessee was to simplify things. I wanted a better quality of life. My kids have flourished. Mm-hmm. Brother, my kids have flourished we go to Grace Life Pentecostal in Memphis, Tennessee, and
Brother Parkey.
Yeah, Pastor Parkey, Bill and Stephanie Parkey. And let me say this at the outset. Those two have been a lifeline to my family. Yeah. Because moving a business all the way across the country with no real sustainable client list set up already, but just, wanting to simplify things. Bill and Stephanie Parkey have, like I said, they've been a lifeline, and they have been absolute jewels to my kids. Mm-hmm. And we thank God every day that we're there, and it's been a good situation.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this has been really, really good. It's just kind of the depth of some of the stuff the encounters that you have with people, the circumstances that happen at some of these events, even some of the church events are absolutely hilarious. And over the course of 20 years, we've got a lot of interesting things working together. But the thing that I really appreciated about you is that in apostolic culture, there's now maybe it's getting better. I hope it is, where there's more engineers in apostolic circles. But part of the problem would be okay, we're a church, right? And we need sound, we need this, we need that. And then coming from the outside in is a sound company that has no clue of what apostolic culture is like at all. And so they come in, we just did a concert for, that's not church. Okay.
Yeah.
That's a crazy concert with a crazy people, crowd. If you bring that into our setting, it's not going to translate.
Or one of the other things I noticed is, you may be on tour with Korn and you may be doing, some really big stuff in the industry, but you cannot view every church as though it's a Lutheran church, because a Lutheran setting will not work in a Pentecostal church. And I find that a lot.
Yeah, so it's got to be somebody that understands the culture,
right?
And then can support you with the production. When I say production, I'm talking about sound, lighting, technology, and typically we always put that at the back end.
Yeah.
We'll make a nice building, but the infrastructure is not there. It should be in the front,
right?
And then everything is built around that. And so then when you have to go back and redo stuff, then it becomes 3 times as costly. So having somebody that is apostolic, that understands the culture, and yet is very, very knowledgeable and can bring in the support to make that happen is just, over the course of your career, that's what has been a huge, huge blessing. And the only downplay to that probably is you need like 3 or 4 or 5 more Terry Stewarts, because you can only do so much.
Although my wife says the world couldn't handle 3 more of me.
Well, there is that.
I do want to say this. Everybody needs to know GBFPC is truly my home church away from home. I have worked here for this church for almost 20 years doing just, different things until we got to the point with the full sanctuary remodel, and we were able to literally, like you said, design things from the ground up and start to implement systems that work. But beyond that, the amount of friendships that I built with this church over the years and maintained a relationship with this church has meant the world to me. This is the one church that I can go to when I'm working, and I really do feel like I'm at home. This is the one place I go to where I am a whole lot less homesick than when I go to other places. Yeah. But once again, that it is that long-term relationship we built. Now, there's always been this long-standing rumor that, of course you like GBFPC. They have hired you for years. Listen, beyond that, it has nothing to do with that, because I am telling you right now, the work that we've done here, I have done things here that just needed to be done and completed that I don't bill for, I don't ask anything for. It just, this is a friendship.
Yeah.
This truly is a friendship.
Yeah, and we know that. I remember we were going to put some projectors in the Livy Center, so we got a price quote from a local company, and it looked way, way too high to me. So I called you and said, Terry, does this look right? And you said, absolutely not. Either they don't want the work, and so they'll just charge ridiculous amounts for it, and that's what they were doing.
Yeah.
I think. And so we ended up doing it for a fraction of the cost.
Yeah.
And we appreciate all, and we know that's forged because of relationship. So thanks for coming in and talking about your testimony. It's a great, great testimony that I think is going to impact people on a lot of different levels. Kevin is a guitarist, started playing guitar here, developed his skill set here, and has become a very, very guitarist. So for musicians to kind of, they're trying to aspire, at least initially, when you're trying to build your chops and your skill sets, you're not as mature, and so you're seeing way out there, and you haven't connected the dots where this can be a ministry and how impacting it can be just in church. Mm-hmm. To hear kind of your story and where it took you is very cautionary, and yet at the same time very enlightening.
One thing I had a question on, as a musician, what's the importance of being grounded in prayer? Because musicians can be up there during an altar call multiple times and not get the chance to do that. And as you build your skills, you get better and better, and sometimes you may get noticed. What's the importance of that?
It is the most important thing a musician can do is maintaining their relationship, and it's for this reason I say that. You have to remember that it was music, it was a musician who was cast out, and it all comes down to pride. And the first thing that occurs in a musician who loses his prayer life is a certain level of a prideful spirit pops up, and that guy becomes very unworkable. People don't, they don't necessarily want to be around him, but keeping grounded and keeping a prayer life keeps that portion, because it just comes along with being a musician. Look, you took something that you could do nothing with, and you built an ability, whether it was a talent given from God, the hard work you put into it, there's a certain level of pride and ownership that just comes with that ability. And keeping that into check, the only way to do it is maintaining a prayer life.
Yeah. My dad instilled in me in the beginning, I think I've been playing for the past 14 years since the beginning of 238. And he told me every time you get up there, you're playing for God's glory.
Yes.
You're not playing for yours.
Yep.
You're always playing for his.
And by the way, I do want to say you did a tremendous job this year at 238. The team, you and the other young man, I forgot. Landon.
Yeah.
The two of you worked as an engineer sitting out mixing. The two of you worked very well together. There was you complemented each other. You could hear you individually. Nobody played it. You did a tremendous job.
Thank you.
Yeah, so let's end with this one. This is kind of set up since we're talking about musicianship. So at senior camp one year, we got the bright idea that we need to do something a little different. So this after church stuff, kids are just standing around. So let's all bring them inside and let's do something fun, just like an added event. So we brought them all inside and we had a drum off. And so, you got all these, you got all these kids, these teenagers, these drummers, like, man, they've got the chops. So it was kind of a setup. So we brought them all out, introduced them, we let them all play, and everybody went crazy. We had a great time. But the last guy that we brought out, we're like, yeah, we're going to bring out the sound guy. We're going to let the sound guy play.
Made
Terry
a mockery
Stewart.
of me.
Terry Stewart, we're going to let him play. And it was ridiculous. It was ridiculous. I've had a chance to play with you on projects. You've done some projects. You've produced some projects for us. And you have been a huge impact in the apostolic world, and more particularly for us. It's made a major impact in our effectiveness in everything that you've done. And people, I know we're probably getting a little long here, but people don't realize what goes behind the scenes. They think it's just some guy comes in, looks at the board, and they don't realize there's cabling in the background. There's amps that got to be set up. Well, it's not wired for your system, so now you got to cut all the cables and resolder all the cables. You'll be sitting there for 2 days soldering stuff. Then you got software. They've got upgrades. There's technology to that. You have to understand the software. You got to be able to program some of the software. Then you got to understand different technologies.
Making two languages speak at the same time.
Yeah, we're not an analog anymore. Now we're going digitally, and you got to understand that. And then you got to try to work things together. And so sometimes people they don't understand. They don't understand all the infrastructure and work that goes behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And so I do. So sometimes people it's too loud. It's not loud enough. We're not hearing enough of this, that. And you got people's hearing. It changes. What's an acceptable level? It is an absolute minefield.
Yeah.
And to be in it for as many years as you've been in it, and still have a passion for what you do, is refreshing, very refreshing. So thank you very, very much, Terry Stewart, for coming in and sharing some of the stuff that you have today. it'll be a blessing to all of us.
Thank you. This is a great platform, and thanks for having me.